Hey folks, it's James, and have you ever thought to yourself, I love everything about Procreate, but I wish I could use it to draw to scale? Well, hold on to your hat, because today I'm going to show you the real-world workflow I use in my own architectural practice to draw floor plans in Procreate two different ways: proactively using a grid template and scale ruler from the start, and retroactively scaling up anything from a napkin sketch to a plan you find online so you can begin to design over it. So you know the routine. Get out your iPads, download the free grid template, scale ruler, and FF&E template that come with this lesson, and get ready to learn two essential techniques for mastering drawing to scale in Procreate. So there are basically two ways that I like to draw to scale. One is what I call proactively drawing to scale, and the other is retroactively drawing to scale. And in proactively, what you're doing is you're starting with maybe it's a sheet of graph paper, or maybe it's an existing floor plan and that you've got because you're putting an addition to it or something. And you also will be starting with a scale. And so before you even make your first mark, you'll have these resources. And then let's say we're doing a 40-foot by 24-foot room. You'll know exactly how big that is, and you'll draw that in, and that's your 40 feet, and that's your 24 feet. Now, the other way we can draw is what I call retroactively. And in this, you just start with a blank piece of paper, and you've got all your touchy-feely emotions intact, and you're just, let me see if I can do that, I'll try that, I'll sketch again. And you're just going to basically estimate the size of things. You still may want to draw a 40 by 20 thing, but you're going to get there by estimating the size of it. You're going to use the proportions of a square, say, for example, and you'll know that that's the 24. And here, so if I subdivide that square, that means each of these is 12. And then if I add one more of those, now I'm at 36. So you'll be using proportions to design without any reference to scale. But you'll then take that and retroactively scale it up to the size that you want on the proper size of gridded paper. And then once that's done, it becomes more like this, and you can then bring in your gridded paper underlay, and then you can add your scale ruler and continue to work that way, okay? So to proactively design to scale, I like to start with a grid template. So I'll go up here, I'll go to Import, and then I'll go to my iCloud Drive, the home page of my iCloud Drive, and I will go to the grid and template section of my iCloud Drive. And if you are working in Imperial, say, I'll go back to the 17 by 11, then once you launch your grid, you can also add in a Imperial scale ruler. So down here you can see I've got the scale rulers. So I'll for instance tap on the half size, and I'll bring up the Architect's 1/8 and 1/4 scale, okay? And all of this is linked together. So both the grid and the scale are at 300 DPI, and they are the actual size. If you print this out on a standard copy machine in an imperial-based country, this will come out to the actual size of a physical scale. And now we use the example of a 40-foot by 20-foot design. So despite the fact that I'm working to scale, I still like to work in a very freehand method. So I'm going to add a layer to this so that both my scale and my grid template are safe. And I'll pick a color. I like to work in red a lot of times. And I'll come up here, and I like to work with this technical pen. And this is part of a brush set that I've put together, but it has all of the things that I use as an architect for concept design and rendering. And I've borrowed these brushes from other places in this vast library of brushes. So I like to design with a technical pen. And I'll just start to lay out that 40 by 24 space. So each of these grids is 8 feet. So I'll go 8, 16, 24, 32, 40. Now you notice that it says 20 here. That's because I've got the scale flipped. So I'll go and highlight that layer. I'll tap the Move and Transform tool, and I'll just rotate this 45 degrees 4 different times. And now you can see that I'm drawing to that scale. So always remember to go back to your design layer before you start again. So I know I'm coming to this point to create my 8th scale first design sketch, okay? So I'll throw in the rest of that room like this. And then I know that that room is going to be 24 this way. And just by coincidence, I'm at 3 squares that way. 3 times 8 equals 24. So I can begin to design. And in this particular example, I'm gonna create kind of living room over here and a dining room over here, and there'll be a fireplace in there. So that's the boundary of the room I'll be designing inside. And of course, there are a number of options that Procreate gives you here. I can go back to this grid that we imported to begin with, and I can turn the opacity of that grid way down, because I don't really like to design over a grid. I find that it makes my design somewhat stiff. So I'll turn the opacity down, and you can still see it. It's a lot lighter. I could even go lighter, but I want this to remain visible to all of you in this lesson. So I'll take it about there. And I'll tap back out of the layer menu. And the other option is that at any time I can change this red pen that I'm using. I can go into the adjustments menu, as you all know, and I can tap on hue saturation. I could change the color if I wanted to get crazy that way, but I can also just completely go down in the saturation and make it black. So let's keep it black for now. So now I'll add a layer, because we'll start to play around with some furniture. And again, we're in the proactively scaled design mode here. And so I'll change this to black, and again, I'm in the technical pen, and sometimes as another option, I'll turn down the opacity, so my black pen becomes a little bit more like a pencil, and I'll just start scribbling. So I'm going to try and make this a dining room. So I know that there might be a piece of furniture, maybe it's 18 inches against this wall, and then maybe I need at least 3 feet before I get to a dining room table, probably more. So let's go 4 feet before we get to the table. Let's make it a 3-foot wide table. And you can see I'm just picking up right on this grid itself. This is going to be a pretty big room, Game of Thrones style. I think I can get 4 chairs on either side for Thanksgiving dinner. And I'll put in a little arrangement bowl in the middle of the table. Then I'll come this way, and maybe this time I'll give 5 feet, because what I'd like to do is put a fireplace in here. And that fireplace is going to have a bit of a hearth. So let me draw the line of the hearth first at, say, 5 feet. So there's ample room to scoot around this table. And I'll throw in, let's say that hearth projects 1 foot, and the firebox itself is 3 feet. And we'll make it a large baronial fireplace that is open on 2 sides, say. Okay, and notice I know I'm going to be drafting this up later or improving it later, so I'll just stay very loose like this. And I'm just going to speed this up at this point, because I think you get the gist of it. You can see me. It's the point to really emphasize is that this is all freehand, and I'm using proportions, a combination of proportions and the grid to guide me as I draw these things. So putting in these details, even adding the windows at the exterior wall, everything's based on this underlying grid. And also based on everything being freehand. So I'm trying to feel the maximum looseness. I'm trying to liberate my imagination as I do this. And I find this is very helpful as opposed to drafting in a straight line method. And at any time I can go back in and activate the scale layer and tap the move. And then I can come over and just check and see, am I way off or am I pretty close? So here I've got about a 3-foot deep sofa, so that's still working. And I'll do this, notice this 2-finger clip, 2-finger pinch to get back to the original size. And now I'll move my scale back out of the way. And again, the great thing about Procreate is I can group these 2 layers together. I'll just highlight that first layer, and then I'll swipe right to left. No, I beg your pardon. I'll swipe left to right on that second layer, and they will now move together. So if I select this, both of those layers will move together, and that's nice because I might want to create options for this design. So I can group these two, and I can close up that group, and you see here if I turn it on and off, that group will turn off. And I'll move the scale out of the way for the minute, and I can actually go back in and duplicate this group if I want to. And when I tap the move tool, you'll see that a whole other group moves over and out of the way. And now I can open that group, and I can do a different furniture layout in there if I wanted to. So a wonderful superpower of Procreate is this ability to duplicate things and move them around on your sheet. So that's what I would call proactively designing to scale with the grid present and even with the scale present to double check things. But I want to first show you the other way of drawing to scale, which is the retroactively drawing to scale. So I'll tap back out of this and go back to the gallery. Now to retroactively design to scale, I'll tap the plus sign up here to launch a piece of paper. And I have, or what Procreate calls canvases, but let's start in the freest possible mode. And in this situation, I will again test my pen, and this is more akin to just opening up a sketchbook on your lap while you're watching a movie or a game and sitting in your living room sofa, or maybe you're sitting on a beach and you just start sketching, and maybe you're working remote that week and you're going to start getting some work because you love this part of design. So here is, I'm going to eyeball a 24 by 24 square, or what I'm really doing is eyeballing a square that has absolutely no dimensions. And I can get to this point and I can press the move and transform tool, and I can rotate it because very often we all have a kind of a bias when we draw like freehand, and you can see this is a little more warped than I thought it would be. So I'll go back and I'll fix these. I'll just make this a little bit more pleasing as a proportion of a square. And this is an acquired skill. I mean, I've been doing this for many, many years, but some of you are probably also very good at this. So I'll go back now to this point, and I'll move that square up about here, and I could make it bigger. Again, I'm in uniform transformation mode. I can make it bigger if I want it to work bigger. It really doesn't matter. It's kind of what's comfortable for you in your design process. And now the next thing I'll do is, I know I'm going to assign the 24-foot dimension to that at some point, but now I'm just going to use the eyeballs to subdivide this square, okay? So when I do that, it's easiest, of course, to estimate the halfway point of a square. And now I know that this is 12 feet and this is 12 feet. And same goes for these. And now I can subdivide this square again, and you can see me kind of adjusting where I think the midpoint is. So now I'll subdivide these squares, and I'll go this way. And in a sense, I'm creating my own graph paper, but you'll see I still haven't created that 40-foot dimension. I have the 24-foot, but I need the 40-foot. So now I'm going to correct these. I had 12 feet, but I've subdivided it again. So now each of these squares is 6 feet. So 6, 6, 6, 6. And by the way, I would do this in a much more intuitive way, but I am going through it step by step at first, just to show you guys the process that went in. And that I learned way back, but I would do this in a much quicker and intuitive way, and you'll be able to as well. So remember, we have 24. We want to add 16 total to this because 24 plus 16 will be 40. Okay. So I've got I can count off an easy 18 here by 3 6s, but I'm going to stop just short of that. And what I'll do is I'll double check what layer I'm on. I'll come over here, I'll tap the selection tool, and I'll tap the rectangular mode of the selection tool, and I'll come up here, I'll start down here, and I'll just pull up and grab, if I stopped there, I would have 18 feet. I'll just come back a little bit. I'll come back 2 feet, and I'm eyeballing that, of course. And now I will copy and paste that selection, okay? I'll copy and paste, and this will add that selection on its own layer, okay? You can't see it yet unless I turn off the underline layer. But I've created a 16-foot long piece here, and now I'll move it and add it to that 24-foot square that I created just using my eyeballs and proportions, okay? So now I'll merge this to eliminate confusion. I'll merge this, and I will scrub out these numbers I assigned, but I'll leave the grid, okay? I'll leave the grid marks. I don't want to lose those. And now I'll just write some more dimensions on these. Now, I know each of these is 6 feet, and this one is going to be the exception. It's only 4 feet, but the overall dimension will be 40 feet, and this will be 24 feet, okay? So now I'll add a layer on top of that, and I'll do what I call the tracing paper layer. I'll change the color to white, and remember, I've just added a new layer. And now I can do my favorite thing, which is drag and drop the white down and drop it onto that layer. So I'm going to do that again. Keep your eyes right here because it can be a little tricky, but I'll tap and hold and drag and drop. And you see how that white is obscuring? That's because it was over there waiting to be released. Now it's been released. And now I'll go to that layer. It's pure white now. And I'll tap the blending mode icon, and I'll reduce the opacity, and you'll see there why I call it the tracing paper layer, because now I can set that opacity wherever I want, and I can begin to design over that, okay? Now I like to have it very kind of opaque so I'm not thrown off by the grid lines, but I want you to be able to see it too. So now I'll add a layer. I'll go back to my black design color. And this time the difference is that I am using these proportions, this sort of graph paper that I created by myself, to lay out the same room basically. And I'm counting the squares. I know that the larger squares are 6 feet. And so I'm just eyeballing how big things are. 3 feet square lounge chairs, 3 foot by 8 foot sofa, something like that. I know I'm not too far off because I've had a lot of practice estimating this. And this is just a very fast way to go, and it's really going to be all scaled later, so it really doesn't make any difference. And it's a terrifically fluid way to engage your imagination. So there's my freehand design. Now, the reason we call this retroactive scaling is because now I want to be responsible and make sure I haven't messed this up, and I want to continue with design development at scale. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import a scale ruler at this point. In fact, I think I'll import both a scale ruler and a grid template. And remember, those grid templates are at the same scale, at the same size as the canvas I launched, which is 11 by 17. And it's also at 300 dpi. So watch what happens when I bring in the grid. So I'll go to my Imperial Grid folder. I'll tap. Okay, so I'll tap this and watch carefully behind what happens. That grid comes in and fills up that entire space without changing that plan at all, okay? So I'm going to move that grid now down to be the bottom layer. And you see, because remember, we have this sheet of tracing paper in here, and if I turn that on and off, you'll see the grid still reads through, so it's still a good reference. And now I am going to go down to my grid. This is what I mean by the retroactive scaling part, okay? I'm going to tap and hold on this checkbox here so that all we see is the grid. And then I'm going to violate one of my own rules by marking up the grid. But the reason is because I want to mark this grid I want to mark off 40 feet in this grid, okay? So this grid is an eighth scale, 1/8 division equals 1 inch, okay? So this is 8 feet at 8th scale, but it's 4 feet at quarter scale, okay? So if I was working at 1/8 scale, this would be 8 feet, as you all know. But remember, I'm not. I'm going to work at quarter scale. So this is now 4 feet, okay? So if I count off 10 of those squares, and I'll start back here so I'm safe. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that's the end of that, okay? Now I'll just mark that because we're going to refer to this in a moment. And if each of these is 4 feet, I want to come and do 6 of them to make that 24 feet, okay? So here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I'll draw another boundary line there. And you all know this, I'm sure. If you hold down the tip of the pencil, you can make sure that line goes exactly where you want. Okay, so there is, to scale, a 24 by 40 foot rectangle, okay? Now, we talked about retroactive scaling, so here's the next step. I'm going to go back to the layer that I designed. In fact, I'm going to weld it to, I'm going to actually join it to the underlying freehand grid that we created, and I'll do that this way. I'll merge this, and now I'll move this whole thing over, okay? And I'm going to make sure I'm in uniform mode, and now I will distort this grid or transform this grid so it matches what we know to be the 24 by 40 rectangle, okay? And we were pretty close. I can finagle up here now. I'm trying to make all of this line up here. And I'm a little bit off down here. So what I'll do now is I'll go back to the Move and Transform tool, but I'll switch to Freeform mode, and I'll grab this handle, and you'll see in a moment that I can move this, I can stretch it just in that dimension when I use Freeform. I can stretch it in this dimension or this dimension, and if I do, I can even do it this way from this corner and stretch it in both dimensions at the same time. But that's what I'll use to make my plan as closely conforming to the underlying 40 by 24 rectangle as possible. So now I'll tap out of the Move and Transform tool. I'll do the 2-finger pinch, and now we are designing more to scale, okay? And in either this mode, in either the retroactive or the proactive mode, very often your next step will be to add another layer of trace. So I'll do that same thing. I'll select white. I'll double check that I'm in a new layer, and I will pull over and release that color white, and this will become, when I tap on this blending mode icon, and I can adjust the opacity, and I'll turn that into my layer of trace. Okay, so now there are 2 more things I'd like to discuss quickly. I know this is taking a long time, and I really appreciate everyone's patience. But let's add another layer to this, and I want to show you how Drawing Assist can help you really polish this up now and get it ready for a presentation. So I'll go to my wrench menu, which is really my actions menu, but I like to call it the wrench. And I'll go to the Canvas tab, and I will engage the drawing guide, okay? Now the drawing guide by default comes up in 2D mode. So let's go back and let's look at that again. Actions, menu, drawing guide, on or off. And the indication that it's on will be that this grid appears. And now I'll go into the edit drawing guide just to show you where your choices are in here. You can see we are in 2D grid, but I could also go into perspective mode. But I'll stay in 2D mode. Now, that's the first step in Drawing Assist. You set Drawing Assist, you engage Drawing Assist, and once it is engaged, curiously, I can make the grid go away by tapping this, by toggling it on or off. But it's still, Drawing Assist is still engaged, and I'll show you that right now because we've added a layer, and we're going to draft this plan. And now when I tap on the layer to bring up the layer pop-up, I see a choice for Drawing Assist. So I can tap that. And what I've just done is I've engaged Drawing Assist in 2D mode. And I like to call that drafting mode. And now I will find a new color. Let's do it in black. I'll choose my brush. I like my technical pen. I'll test it over here just to see how thick the lines are. Now remember, I can keep the line more elegant and thin by just not pressing as hard. If I press harder, it'll get bigger. But I can work with this, okay? So now I'll zoom in, and I think I'll reduce the opacity of this tracing layer so you can follow this a bit better. And once again, I'll double check that I'm in my new layer, and I will come in and draft this plan. And keep in mind that depending on what brush you use, if you lay it down sideways or press a little harder, that line might be thicker. Otherwise, keep it vertical, and you can regulate that line, keep it very similar to a technical drafting pencil or pen. So I'll go back to the layer of trace, and I'll make it a little more opaque because I want this furniture to almost go away. I hope you can faintly see it now. And at this point, you can imagine that this is the beginning of your, if you're into that, if you don't want to keep your designs freehand, this can be the beginning of your drafted plan, okay? But there is one more fun touch to all this. I'll add a layer, and I'll go into my brush library, and another one of my secret weapons is that I've created what I call the FF&E 1/8 and 1/4 scale library of FF&E, or placeholder furniture, okay? And each of these is labeled. Here's a quick 1/8 set, but the rest of these are, which incorporates every kind of room. But because the 1/4-inch brushes are bigger, the 1/4-inch stamps are bigger, I had to, and I'll tap here and show you, I had to classify them by room. So let's go to the room where it says seating only, or maybe it's group seating. Now let's go to seating only, and I'll engage that. I'll tap out of the brush library. I'll make sure that I'm in a new layer, and now watch. I'm going to tap firmly in the center of this space, okay? And when I do that, up comes furniture. And it's already at 1/4-inch scale because, again, of all that we did to make sure that the 300 DPI extends across all of our drawings, okay? And now I can select. It's a little confusing. Maybe what I'll do is I'll move this layer of trace up above even the sketch plan that we did. And now those have been stamped in, and I will go to the selection tool in rectangle mode, and I'll find some placeholder furniture. So I'll start with this sofa here, and I'll use the copy and paste mode here, and that, as you recall, lifts it off and places it on its own layer. And now I can turn off the underlying template layer. Just tap this checkbox. That goes away. Now this is already selected. I can tap the move tool, and I can rotate it. I can either rotate it this way, or I can come back here and rotate it this way, okay? And it's already ready to be moved around, so I'll place that here, okay? Now, I'm curious, I don't want to mislead anybody, so I'll go back, and I'm going to add a scale ruler, okay? And let's just make sure that this all works. I want you to see how kind of cool this is. So I'll go to the Add the Actions menu. I'll go to the Add tab. I'll go to Insert a File. I'll go back to the home page of iCloud Drive, and that's the real back and forth communication between Procreate and your own file system is iCloud Drive. And I will look for the scale rulers, and I'll bring in the half scale ruler that has all the imperial and metric and engineering scales. I'll tap on the 1/4-inch scale, and I'll bring that in. And notice that the 1/4-inch part is down here, so I want to rotate that like this. And now I'll bring this up, and we'll measure that sofa. And you can see, sure enough, my freehand was a little off. It was a little sketchy, but that sofa is about 7 feet long by 3 feet wide, okay? So I'll turn off the scale. We know everything's working. For more tips and techniques in iPad drawing, I invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And don't forget to check out the online courses I offer in Procreate, Morpholio Trace, and SketchUp for iPad, linked in the description below. A special thanks to David Drazil for hosting this online event, and to all of you for joining me. You can see the videos I made for last year's event in the Sketching Retreat playlist on my YouTube channel, and I look forward to connecting with you and continuing this conversation online. Thanks, everybody.